the night he lost everything, Daniel Reed stood in the middle of his small apartment, surrounded by silence, so heavy it felt like another person in the room. The curtains hung crooked, the paint on the walls peeled in thin strips, and the last unopened letter from the bank lay on the table. He hadn't dared to open it yet, though he already knew what it said. Eviction, debt, failure. Just a year ago, Daniel had been the kind of man people pointed at with admiration. He wore crisp suits, shook hands that mattered, and walked into restaurants where the waiters already knew his order. He had a wife who believed in him, friends who called for advice, and a career that looked like it was only climbing upward. But the world has a way of testing what you're made of. The company he worked for collapsed in a scandal he had nothing to do with, but it didn't matter. When the ship sank, everyone on board went down with it. Overnight, his reputation turned from trusted to toxic. Investors stopped returning his calls. His savings evaporated. His wife, tired of living in the shadows of his losses, packed her bags and left. That was the night Daniel first tasted the metallic bitterness of rock bottom. For weeks, he drifted. He spent mornings staring at the ceiling, afternoons walking aimlessly through the city, and evenings trying to drown the silence with cheap whiskey. His phone buzzed with messages at first, concerned friends, old colleagues, but eventually even those stopped. People have a way of forgetting you when you have nothing left to offer. One night, after another failed attempt to sleep, Daniel walked outside. The city was alive. Cars honking, neon signs flickering, strangers laughing as they spill out of bars. He envied them all. Then, as he crossed the bridge, he stopped in the middle and leaned against a railing. The river below was dark, endless, inviting. And for a terrifying moment, he thought of letting go. But something, maybe stubbornness, maybe the faint whisper of who he used to be, kept him there. He didn't jump. Instead, he stared at his reflection in the black water. Hollow eyes, unshaven jaw, shoulders bent under invisible weight. And he said out loud to no one, "This isn't how it ends." It was the first time in months he had spoken with conviction. The next morning, Daniel opened that unopened letter from the bank. The words were as harsh as he expected. Final notice. Yet instead of crushing him, they ignited something. He realized that nothing else could be taken from him, because there was nothing left. And when you have nothing left, you're free. Daniel decided he would rebuild. Not the old life, because that was gone forever, but something new, something stronger. He started small, at a local diner. He took a job washing dishes. It was humiliating for a man who once gave presentations in boardrooms with panoramic city views. But it was honest. The owner, an older woman named Margaret, noticed how quietly and efficiently he worked. After a week, she handed him an envelope with cash and said, "You're better than this job, I can tell. But don't rush. Build slowly, brick by brick." For the first time in a long while, Daniel smiled. Every morning, he woke up earlier. He shaved. He walked to the diner with purpose. And in the evenings, he went to the library. There, under the yellow glow of lamps, he read books about business, psychology, self-discipline. He filled notebooks with scribbles, ideas, plans. He remembered something his father once told him when he was a boy. A man is not measured by how high he stands, but by how many times he can rise after he falls. So Daniel rose, inch by inch. He saved money from the diner job. Not much, but enough to buy an old laptop. He began freelancing online. First small gigs, writing product descriptions, then more complex work. He treated every client like they were his last hope. Slowly, reviews stacked up. More jobs came. Margaret, watching him from behind the diner counter, once said, "It's like seeing someone come back from the dead." But Daniel wasn't just coming back. He was becoming someone new. By the end of that year, he quit the diner job. He rented a small shared office space where he could focus on his freelance business. He networked with other freelancers, absorbed their knowledge, and offered help in return. His old arrogance was gone. What replaced it was humility, hunger, and persistence. Still, doubts haunted him some nights. He wondered if he'd ever really escaped the shadow of his downfall. Some mornings he looked at the mirror and thought, "Am I fooling myself?" But then he'd remember that night on the bridge, the choice not to let go, and he'd push forward. One rainy evening, as he was working late, Daniel received an email. A company he'd applied to months ago wanted to hire him as a consultant for a major project. It wasn't just any company. It was one of the biggest firms in the city. The same city where he had once been written off as a failure. Daniel sat there, staring at the screen, heart pounding. He whispered again, the same words as that night. "This isn't how it ends." The consulting job began in a glass tower with elevators that moved like thoughts, fast and without apology. Daniel wore the only suit he still owned. It didn't fit like it used to, but it carried him across the lobby like armor. At the reception desk, a woman handed him a badge that read temp. He smiled at the word, temporary, as if life itself wasn't. The company's problem was simple to describe and hard to solve. A flagship product people had stopped trusting. Too many updates that broke what used to work. Too many promises, not enough listening. The board wanted a miracle, or at least a story they could tell until one arrived. In the first meeting, Daniel said little. He asked questions. He wrote answers without decoration. When a senior executive jabbed a finger toward a chart and demanded a leapfrog strategy, Daniel recognized the old language of panic. Big words for a simple fear. We're losing. He knew that fear. He'd lived in it. "Give me 30 days, he said at last. Not for a miracle. For clarity. They raised eyebrows but agreed. Daniel returned to the library, not as a man in hiding this time, but as a student on a mission. He read case studies and customer forums until the pages blurred. He visited stores pretending to be a confused shopper. He interviewed support reps and asked what they were tired of apologizing for. He ate noodles out of a paper cup at midnight and thought of Margaret's voice. Build slowly, brick by brick. By the second week, a picture emerged. The product was still good at its core. It had just forgotten why it existed. It had been smothered by features, by noise, by the kind of ambition that's too proud to kneel and listen. He called a meeting at 7 a.m. before the executives put on their armor. On the screen, instead of charts, he showed 3 short videos. Customers speaking in shaky phone camera clips. A nurse on a night shift. A carpenter with sawdust in his hair. A college student who'd saved for months. Each said the same thing in different words. I don't need everything. I need the thing to do the one thing well. Silence. Daniel cleared his throat. We don't need more features, he said softly. We need fewer. We need dignity. Give people back what they came for. It sounded almost naive, but truth often does. The company pared back the product to its essentials. They redesigned the onboarding to be human, not clever. They changed the update schedule from frantic to reliable. They replaced the loudest slogans with quiet promise. It just works when you need it most. There was pushback. There were tense calls where executives worried that simplicity would make them look small. There were 2 awful days where a key integration broke, and Daniel thought the whole thing would sink. He almost called to say he couldn't fix it. Instead, he went to the diner. Margaret slid a coffee his way. "How's the fancy tower?" "Loud," he said. "Everyone speaks in thunder." She smiled. "Then be the rain." He laughed, because it was exactly the kind of sentence you roll your eyes at until you realize you can drink it. Back at the office, he listened more. He asked the engineers what they would build if no one was watching. He asked support what they would stop apologizing for first. He asked customers what a good day felt like. And he carried those answers like lanterns into rooms where people argued in the dark. At the end of 30 days, the company launched not a new product, but a new way of treating the old one. The first week's numbers were modest, then surprising, then excellent. The nurse filmed a follow-up video with a tired smile. "This is what I needed." The carpenter said he'd recommended it to 3 friends. The student posted a screenshot of her first smooth setup and simply wrote, "Finally." The board sent a formal thank you. The executive sent stiff emails that softened with every line. The recruiter sent an offer, a very good one. He told them he was grateful. Then he said no, because somewhere between dishwashing and midnight reading, between empty rooms and unexpected kindness, Daniel had found not just a way out, but a way forward. He didn't want to be owned by a single tower, no matter how high. He wanted to build something on the ground where he'd been broken, something that would outlast his name. He called it Bridge and Brick. The name made people tilt their heads. He liked that. Bridges for the nights you needed to cross the dark. Bricks for the mornings you needed to lay the next piece. He hired a team of quiet fighters, a designer who left a famous agency to care for a parent and lost all her clients, a developer who took a gap year that stretched into 3 and thought his resume was ruined, a project manager returning to work after grief. No glitter, no elevator speeches, just people who knew how to rebuild. They specialized in simplicity with a spine. They took products that had grown wild and pruned them back to heartwood. They returned dignity to customer journeys. They treated metrics like a chorus, not a solo. And they wrote, in every proposal, we build for the moment a person needs help at 2 a.m. We build for the breath that follows relief. Word spread, not fast but right. The firm grew. They moved from a shared office to a place above a florist where the air smelled like second chances. Daniel called his father and left a message he'd rehearsed 100 times. You were right about how a man is measured. When his father called back, there was a pause on the line so full of pride that no sentence could carry it. One afternoon, on a walk between meetings, Daniel saw his ex-wife across the street. He almost kept going. Instead, he crossed. "Hi," he said, hands in pockets. She blinked, surprised, then smiled in a cautious way. "You look different." "I am," he said. "Thank you for the part of my life we had." "I wasn't ready to say that back then, but I am now." She nodded. "I'm glad you found your feet." "On my knees first," he said. They laughed. And it wasn't a new beginning, and it didn't need to be. It was a good ending to an old chapter, which is another kind of beginning. That evening, he returned to the bridge. The river moved with the same dark patience. He stood where he had once counted the reasons to let go and found only one reason to stay. What if there's more? He spoke out loud again, because some words deserve air. This is how it continues. A year later, Bridge and Brick sponsored scholarships for people starting over, single parents entering tech, veterans shifting careers, anyone with that look in their eyes, the one he'd seen in his own reflection. On the application, the only required essay was a simple prompt. Tell us about a time you chose to stay. The company grew, yes, revenue, awards, all the shiny nouns. But the numbers Daniel kept on his whiteboard were different. Projects rescued, support tickets prevented, employees taking vacations without dread, clients choosing slower, Kinder roadmaps that still won. He wrote a line at the bottom and circled it. Success is the absence of panic. One night, after a long day that had the good kind of tired in it, Daniel found himself back at the diner. Margaret poured coffee before he could ask. "You did it," she said. "We did it," he corrected. "You gave me a job when I needed a mirror." She shrugged the way generous people do when they don't want applause. "You washed dishes like you were trying to clean the moon. I just handed you a towel." They sat in the soft clatter of plates and low conversation. Daniel looked around and understood something simple and profound. The place where you begin again becomes holy, no matter how ordinary it looks. Before he left, he slid a thick envelope across the counter. "For repairs," he said, "and for whatever else dreams require." She didn't open it. She just reached out, squeezed his hand, and said, "Brick by brick." If you've listened this far, maybe something in you is standing on a bridge. Maybe the city around you is loud with other people's certainty, and your pockets are full of letters you're afraid to open. Maybe your name has been a headline in rooms you no longer enter. If so, hear this. You are not finished, not because a stranger believes in you, not because a story says you'll rise, but because there's a part of you, quiet, stubborn, unkillable, that knows how to make tea in a burned kitchen and sweep the floor before the light comes back. You do not need a miracle. You need a morning. You need a small job done well. You need one person who sees you. And today, let it be you. Start where you are. Wash the first dish. Answer the one email like it matters. Show up 10 minutes early to the place that still opens its door for you. Read at the library under the yellow lamps. Ask dumb questions. Be the rain in rooms of thunder. Trade clever for clear. Trade more for enough. Trade armor for attention. And when the voice in your head says it's too late, ask it a better question. What if it isn't? What if you are only at the part of the story where the character learns the most useful thing, how to stand, not because the world applauds, but because standing is what lets you take the next step. One day, you will look back and bless even the fall, not because it was fair or painless, but because it taught you the physics of rising. You will sit across from someone who thinks they're alone in the dark and tell them a secret. I have been where you are. The ground is closer than you think. Use it to push. And if you ever find yourself on a bridge at night, hearing the river invite you down, remember Daniel. Remember Margaret. Remember the nurse, the carpenter, the student. Remember the simple promise that rebuilt a company and a life. It just works when you need it most. Let that promise be yours. This is how it continues.